Why are they still trying to hide this? Remember that toxic train derailment in Ohio? Yeah, who could forget that, right? The one where the railroad company Norfolk Southern is saying that it's all under control? Yeah, that one. Well, surprise, surprise. It's totally not under control. Even the railroad workers themselves are getting sick at the site. Here, check this out.
In the meantime, tonight, union leaders say rail workers are getting sick at the site of the East Palestine train derailment in Ohio. Toxic water runoff from when crews put out an inferno of burning chemicals is being brought to a disposal site in Harris County. The NTSB also has an update. It's calling this accident 100% preventable. The train apparently had problems with some of its pressure valves. If they had worked properly, the NTSB says it would have minimized the chance for an explosion. The CEO of Norfolk Southern is expected to testify in front of a Senate committee next week.
Now, I don't think that any of us are surprised anymore, especially considering the kind of toxic stuff that this train has been carrying, right? I mean, you've got butyl acrylate, you've got ethyl hexyl acrylate, vinyl chloride, and there's a whole host of others. Now, that last one is probably the nastiest of all of them. When burned, vinyl chloride decomposes into different gases that include hydrogen chloride and phosgene. Now, hydrogen chloride has a very strong, irritating odor and is corrosive to any tissue that comes in contact with it. Guys, it melts your skin off. Now, the other one, phosgene, it smells like freshly cut hay, and it can cause coughing and wheezing if inhaled. Now, when exposed to these chemical compounds over a long period of time, people can develop all sorts of illnesses, including cancer. Now, we've already seen headlines of Ohio residents getting bronchitis because of this stuff. And this isn't just a one-time thing happening to faraway Ohio. Just recently, a whole different train carrying highly explosive propane derailed just near the Florida airport. Now, like the local folks are saying, we just need answers. How are we supposed to trust these rail companies and the government officials if nobody's coming clean about any of this stuff, right? And it says it right here. More than 80% of U.S. waterways contaminated by forever chemicals. Plus, the Biden Department of Justice seems to be backing Norfolk Southern's bid to block lawsuits related to this. So what's up with that? Let me know what you guys think about this. Do you still trust anybody in our government? Drop me a quick comment down below on that. Now, before I continue, please take a second, smash the like button for the video. I totally appreciate that. And for your daily dose of the truth when it comes to the U.S. government, Social Security, SSI, SSDI, the housing market, the stock market, and everything that's going on in Washington, D.C. that affects our lives, our families, and our bank accounts, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you own a home, make sure that your home is protected. Get your free home warranty quote. The link is in the description down below. It only takes like 15 seconds so that you're never caught off guard by another very expensive, unexpected home repair again. Get your free home warranty quote link down below, guys. Now, for real, this is really getting serious. Officials are investigating a train that derailed in Florida, which left mangled tracks and a tanker carrying thousands of gallons of propane tipped over just a couple weeks after the toxic train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. The Seminole Gulf Railway, this train jumped its tracks near Sarasota-Bradenton International Airport, and fire and rescue officials said there were no reports of injuries reported and no evidence of leaks at the site. Now, Southern Manatee Fire District Chief Robert Bounds, he reported that 6 boxcars tipped over, including one carrying 30,000 gallons of propane. There was another carrying propane that came off the tracks, but it did not tip over. So I guess that was a good thing, right? We wouldn't want 60,000 gallons of this stuff in the water, right? So basically, industry experts and government officials have said longer trains with increased equipment, workforce cuts, and rail companies' pushback against safety rules are making trains less safe. Who would have thought that would happen, right? And rail companies, they don't even seem to be planning to do anything about it. Experts predict that more rail accidents are likely to happen due to potential equipment malfunctions and, of course, the lack of rail workers providing services. At some point, won't they just kind of run out of trains? Anyway. Just last month, we saw a few train derailments happening in the country. On February 3rd, about 50 Norfolk Southern rail cars derailed in East Palestine and prompted evacuations as officials decided to do a controlled release of hazardous materials to prevent major explosions. Another Norfolk Southern train derailment in Michigan on February 16th, where about 30 cars were around 30 miles west of downtown Detroit. Officials said that the majority of derailed cars were empty and a rail car containing hazardous material was not derailed. More than 24 Ocean Pacific train cars carrying coal derailed in Nebraska on February 21st. The cause of derailment was under investigation. More than 1,000 train derailments happen every single year right here in the good old US of A. But train accidents that spill hazardous materials, those are rare. or at least they should be. Now, apparently hazmat cargo violations caught during this inspection of rail shippers and operators appears to be climbing. Now, over the last 5 years, federal inspections of rail shippers and operators have flagged 36% more hazmat violations compared to 5 years prior. In response to these accidents, lawmakers have called for increased safety regulations for railroads, including stronger tank car standards and stricter limits on train speeds. But the rail industry has pushed back against these regulations, arguing that they would be too expensive and would hinder their ability to move goods efficiently. And of course, Congress listens to the deep pockets of these billionaire railroad entrepreneurs instead of the voices of the American people. In fact, I've heard from boots on the ground information about this. Apparently, railroad employees have been sounding the alarm for 2 years, and it was a huge part of why they wanted to strike. They said it right here, quote, "You just heard pay raise and PTO, not the safety issues that we're bringing up. None of them made it to the Presidential Emergency Board or the tentative agreements that they forced us to accept with legislation. I moved to live 20 miles from the main line. What does that tell you? This is not the first and it will not be the last," end quote. All right, so let's take a quick look back into the history of this whole circus. So back in the day, railroads were the primary mode of transportation for people and goods across the country. And with that kind of power, rail companies, they had a lot of influence over the government. They used this influence to push laws and regulations that, of course, favored their own interests. And usually this came at the expense of the general public. So one example of this is the Railroad Act of 1862, which gave huge amounts of land to the railroad companies in order to incentivize them to build new tracks. Now, on the surface, this might sound like a pretty good thing. More tracks means faster and more efficient transportation, right? Okay, I'm on board so far, right? But the problem was that these lands were often taken from the indigenous people and other communities who had been living on these lands for generations. Plus, the railroad companies were given huge subsidies and tax breaks, which meant that they were able to make huge profits while workers who built and maintained the tracks often lived in poverty. Definitely sounds a little familiar to what's happening to us right now in our country. And it's not just historical examples like this. Even today, railroad companies still have a lot of power over the government. They use their influence to push the laws and the regulations that benefit them, often at the expense of workers and communities. So why does this happen? Well, part of it is simply because the railroad companies, they have a lot of money and resources to throw around. They're able to lobby lawmakers and fund political campaigns, which means they have a lot of sway over the laws that end up getting passed. But it's also because of the government sees the railroad companies as essential for the country's economic growth. Certainly puts us in a catch-22 situation. They're seen as a key part of the transportation infrastructure that keeps goods and people moving across the country. And so even when railroad companies engage in these shady practices, people get hurt, even when they've been found guilty of exploiting their workers, the government is often hesitant to take action for the fear of damaging the economy even further as a whole. I don't know. I think it's time that we actually hold these people accountable for their unethical or exploitative practices. But what do you guys think? Now, I have friends living in Ontario, Canada, and they told me about that cloud and how that cloud of crap went right over the top of them. Canada, guys. People working right outside were wondering why their lungs were hurting so bad. And then the next day they found out about this train derailment. That chemical spill definitely did a lot more damage than just one little town. East Palestine residents were told the municipal water, it was safe to drink, but they were also advised to buy bottled water. Why would you advise them to do that if they don't have to? What are you trying to hide? Now, a lot of them have complained of rashes after taking showers. Residents were told they only had vinyl chloride to fear. Then the list of dangerous chemicals spilled by the train, it grew. And at this rate, federal agencies may not release the full list of chemicals for months, if ever. It definitely feels like each day brings a whole new set of contradictions, and every bit of information from these officials feels like it raises more questions than answers. According to one resident, quote, "People are just angry, but they just don't know who to be angry with because we're not getting enough information to know who to be mad at. The air is fine, but don't go outside. Your water is fine, but drink bottled water. You just can't trust them." Now, at the site of the wreck, crumbled and charred tankers, these cars, they still lay in the mud beside the tracks. And if you go there, some places still have this strong chemical odor hanging over the air. Residents have described this as similar to turpentine or bleach and said it just sticks to your nose. Breathing it in for a few minutes may leave a metallic taste like pennies. They've already reported dead pets or foxes, and the birds or outdoor cats that they feed have disappeared. Plus, there's this chemical sheen that still coats parts of the small creeks that run through town and the dead fish that have been found throughout the local waterways. A company spokesperson highlighted more than $1.5 million spent on resident assistance, including direct payments of $1,000. But let's go ahead and put this into perspective, shall we? So Norfolk Southern this year announced $10 billion in stock buybacks and reported $3.2 billion in profits last year. That $1.5 million in damage payments definitely seems like a drop in the ocean if you look at how much Norfolk Southern could be paying up. Now, one comment I read said, quote, "I live in Southern Ohio and I've been mind blown at how our state and federal governments have turned a blind eye to what is a huge concern of mine regarding our drinking water. Is it toxic to now shower? I mean, there's an abundance of unanswered questions that we all have." Now, according to this, most of America's waterways are likely contaminated by toxic forever chemicals. This is coming from nonprofit network the Waterkeeper Alliance analysis that found detectable levels in 95 out of 114, or 83% of waterways tested across 34 states and the District of Columbia, and frequently at levels that exceed federal and state limits. The Waterkeeper Alliance CEO, Mark Yagi, pointed out how, quote, "The results clearly show widespread contamination across the country and demonstrate that existing laws and regulations are inadequate for protecting us," end quote. Now, these chemicals are what they call PFAs, and they're used to make products resist water, stain, and heat. They're called forever chemicals because they don't naturally break down, and they're linked to cancer, liver problems, thyroid issues, birth defects, kidney disease, decreased immunity, and all sorts of other serious health problems. So basically, they're just poisoning our water now, and the government isn't doing a darn thing about it. Oh wait, let me correct that. Biden's Department of Justice seems to be doing something for the railroad companies like Norfolk Southern. They're actually helping them block lawsuits from the American people. In the case against Norfolk Southern, the Biden administration is siding with the railroad company in its conflict with a cancer-stricken former railroad worker. The lawsuit in question, filed initially in Pennsylvania County Court in 2017, it deals with a state law that permits plaintiffs to file suit against any corporation registered to do business there, even if the actions that gave rise to the case occurred elsewhere. In its fight against the lawsuit, Norfolk Southern is asking the Supreme Court to uphold the lower court ruling, overturn Pennsylvania's law, and restrict where corporations can be sued. Now, if the court rules in favor of Norfolk Southern, it could overturn plaintiff-friendly laws on the books in states like Pennsylvania, New York, and Georgia that give workers and any consumers more leeway to choose where they take corporations to court. Basically, this will let national corporations get away with requiring customers and employees to agree to file litigation in specific locales whose laws make it harder to hold companies accountable. Basically, more bureaucratic loopholes and hoops just to make it harder for the average person to get their day in court. Talk about sick, right? But let me know what you guys think about this. I definitely don't think that we should be letting these people get away with this, but share your thoughts in the comments down below, and let me know if you're interested in more news like this in the future. I mean, we definitely can't plan for our financial freedom in the future if we're too busy getting sick from what all these different companies are doing to our water supply, right? And also, in the description of this video, you will find a link for the best way to invest in gold. Be sure to check that out. But anyway, guys, this was our information package in today's news update. Norfolk Southern rail workers getting sick from the toxic train derailment, residents complaining about all sorts of rashes and illnesses, and Norfolk Southern and all these railroad companies trying to silence the people. Appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for the thumbs up and the support. Be sure to hit the share button and get this information out. I don't want other people getting sick needlessly. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching. Please be kind to one another, and I will see you on the next one.